What up?
What's happening? How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is episode 159 of History Lessons. I'm with Eternia. Thank you, like I said, so much for joining me this afternoon.
Oh man, it was like a crazy whirlwind trying to get my family out the door so I could do this without interruptions from a 2-year-old. So I'm like still kind of like shell shocked. Like I just threw myself together in 10 minutes. They just left.
Right. Like I said, appreciate it. For those who may be new to you or may have forgotten, let's take it back. Where were you born and raised?
Well, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I moved around a lot though. I was kind of like an army brat without being in the army or without my family being in the army. Moved around a lot.
What was teenage years like life for you growing up in Ottawa?
I was there for maybe a year or two. You said teenage years, right?
Right.
I was actually all over as a teenager, not just Ottawa. I maybe spent 2 years there. And interestingly enough, how much time you got? I've lived in New York City, I've lived in Toronto, but I have never seen so much drugs and guns and violence as I did the couple of years that I was in Ottawa as a teenager. I say that capitals of countries are usually the dirtiest cities, and Ottawa is no exception. The underbelly is usually pretty ugly. So that's what I saw when I was there as a teenager, but I wasn't there for too long.
Right. Before getting into music, what were some of your earlier interests?
Oh, wow. I loved cats and dogs, still do. Wanted to be a veterinarian. I did not have boy bands on my wall when I was a kid. I had cats and dogs on my wall.
Okay.
Music was always since I was born, and writing. So whether that be creative writing, I was writing like full novels when under the age of 10. I had like 50 plus pages of like a sci-fi, like crazy shit, lots of poetry. And my mother is a classically trained pianist, and my father owned a nightclub, and he had a studio built into the side of the bar that he would go into and kind of retreat in the middle of the night when the club was popping. So on both sides, I was influenced by music since I was born.
So take us back to some of your earlier influences music-wise before getting into music personally.
Well, I think about the people that played music around me. So before I had a choice to pick my own songs, people were picking them for me. My mother, she loved like Carole King, and she loved Kenny Rogers. My father loved Nina Simone, and he loved Santana. My father played the hand drums as well, the congas. My brother listened to PE and Two Live Crew and Black Sheep, and he introduced hip hop to me in the 80s. The music is much more varied than that, but those are just some of the names off the top of the head.
So can you talk about transitioning into music? Was hip hop your first transition, or were you into other genres as well before getting into hip hop?
Lots of other genres. Yeah, lots of other genres. Hip hop was the thing before the age of 10, probably around the age of 8, that really captivated me and never let go. But I always listened to really strong singer-songwriters, really strong pianists. Some of those I mentioned already, and R&B too. So by the time I was old enough to pick my own music, I'd say hip hop, dancehall, and R&B of the 90s were the soundscape for my life. But before that, and I still do love a really good singer-songwriter. Carole King is one of my favorite artists of all time. I feel like I'm like the hip-hop version of her. So.
No doubt.
That's kind of a big statement, but Janis
So how did you
love Janis Joplin?
Absolutely. Like so how did you personally get involved with hip hop? Was emceeing your first foray, or breakdancing, graffiti, DJing? What for Eternia was your first element as far as hip hop goes?
That's funny. I always just assume it's hard for me to imagine doing anything else other than rapping. So yeah, it was always rapping. I always was a writer first and foremost. And then I translated as a very young, like probably at around the age of 10, I translated my writing of poetry into writing raps because that's what I was listening to because of my older brother. And at that time, I always say this, it's like a white girl from Canada was not thinking about being a white girl from Canada. She was just like, this is what I listen to. I'm a kid. I write. This is what I do. And on the playground in grade 5, people would ask me to rap for them. They were written. They weren't freestyles. Or I was spitting somebody else's lyrics, but always rapping, always lyrics, nothing else.
At what point did you start taking writing serious?
um, 13, I was doing it all the time, constantly, like every day. 15 is when I got kicked out of the house. And 15 is when I would say it became the beginning of a very serious, the preparation for a career. Because at that point, I wasn't even in school and I wasn't working, and I was kind of bouncing from house to house for a period of 2 years, 15 to 17 approximately. And the only thing that was kind of like my grounding foundation was hip hop, not just the music, but the culture and the people and the family of hip hop. In Canada, hip hop was still underground. And so you meet anybody that knows good hip hop music, the true heads, we were always supporting and looking out for each other. So that's often how I would find couches to sleep at or crews to roll with. And it was protection as well. So it wasn't just something I loved to listen to and or mimic. It was something that was like a family for me when I moved out of the house.
Right. That was my next question. What was the Canadian scene, hip hop scene like during that time? What did you see visually?
Yeah, so in the 90s, we're talking about like early, mid, late, I'm just talking about the 90s in general. In the 90s, hip hop was still, it's not, when I say underground, I mean, obviously there was these huge acts like Run DMC and stuff that came out that everybody knew that was on major radio. But in general in Canada, it's like if you really knew what was out, it's like this secret language. It's like if you found somebody that knew what was popping and what was happening, it was like you found a long lost, it's like the secret tribe, like some like secret society shit. That's how it felt. College radio was pretty much the only radio that really played consistently hip hop. We had maybe 1 hour of television a week on, if you had cable, on Much Music that might play some hip hop videos. Other than that, it was like nothing. It was all Canadian kind of white singer songwriter content. And so yeah, it was like this kind of lost tribe of people that would, especially, and I'm referring to the independent scene,
Right.
And the major scene wasn't really that popping for hip hop in Canada. There were a few that broke through for sure. I think of Chaos, Cardi, Socrates, but off the top of my head, yeah, it was still a very small scene and very indie, and it kind of felt like you had the secret password, you know what I'm saying, to get into the lair when you knew your hip hop.
Right. Did you have a mentor earlier on?
I had many different seasons of my life. So one of the first ones I can think of, although I'm sure there was more even before that, is Apathy. Because when I was 17 years old, I moved to Connecticut. We met on the internet.
This is MySpace days?
This is way before MySpace. We're talking Microsoft Internet Relay Chat in 1995, 96. I was early to the internet. So no, we're talking like 95, 96, 97. So yeah, we met on Microsoft Internet Relay Chat, where all the people that were ahead of their time were. And I moved to Connecticut in 97. And I always say that I went from sounding like Salt and Pepper when I moved there, and then leaving kind of sounding like Pharoah Monch. You know what I'm saying? Like the growth was vast just by virtue of being a part of the Demigodz, being in that crew. All we really did was focus on hip hop and what our goals were in our demos, and like that's basically all we ate and slept and breathed. So yeah, that was a big boot camp for me. And there was other boot camps after that with other people, other crews, other seasons of my life, but that would be the first major. Yeah.
Right. Did you pursue solo first, or was Demigodz your first group situation?
That's a good question. I mean, all throughout the 90s, I was a part of different rap crews. I moved around a lot, thus the different rap crews. So it's like wherever I would be, it's like somebody would adopt me and be like, okay, you're a part of our crew now. We rock stages, we record. So I'd say in the 90s, I wasn't necessarily thinking about a solo career, but as of around 2000, I was like, okay, like this is just how it's just how the cookies crumbled. I remember for the longest time wishing that I wasn't a solo artist, because I used to think it was so dope that all you had to do was write a dope 16. I'm like, yo, that shit is easy. I'm like, you're in a group, all you gotta do is write 16. I'm like, oh man, I'd have that for days. So I was mad that I had to think of like the entire song and the hook and the whole concept and the album. Like I didn't want to do that. And for probably the first 5 years of my adult career, which is like post 2000, I was like, oh man, I wish I was in a crew. But I learned to own it.
Right. Earlier on, can you take us back to some of the dues you paid early on to get your name out there, whether it was with the group or solo, before getting signed and deals? What did Eternia do to get her name out there?
You know, this kind of stuff was as natural as breathing to me. And it's only in hindsight that I'll be like, yo, that was some serious boot camp. Like that was some hip hop boot camp. So lots of open mics, lots of like outside of venues on the street, spitting late at night or early in the morning. Lots of, and for me, like in the 90s, doing that, people would just look at me like I was crazy. Like, what's this chick gonna do? Like, you know, I heard a lot of, I developed a thick skin early, you know what I'm saying? But just anytime anybody would ask you to spit anywhere, and we physically went places. So we would physically go to radio shows, college radio shows, and spit. We would physically go to these venues, and oftentimes we wouldn't be the ones on stage in the 90s. Well, sometimes, but we'd be spitting outside or spitting in the corner or meeting up with other MCs. But just a whole lot. I think for me, I realized in hindsight, especially in light of COVID, that a lot of my hip hop formation was done in crews and in groups and in community. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't like now where people are in their bedrooms recording on their laptops. It was very much you roll out, you are physically in front of a crowd, you are physically in front of a whole bunch of dudes with no chicks. And they're like, and now you spit. You know what I'm saying? And everyone's looking at you like, yeah, right. There was a lot of that for decades, actually. I think I still experience it to a certain extent, but definitely when I was a teenager.
Can you take us back to recording demos? Was your first time on Wax with the Demigodz, or was there earlier demos?
Actually, my first time on Wax was not with the Demigodz, because when I was with them, I called them the Demogods, because all we did was record demos and they never came out. They actually ended up kind of blowing up after I was no longer like officially part of the crew, although I've always been cool with them. So I'd say the first time that I can remember being on Wax was with Adam's Family, Def Jux Adam's Family, and that would have been around 99 or 2000. I was on this track called Rhyming for Dummies with Vast Air and Cryptic, and shout out to both of them for putting me on that. And I remember seeing Crip holding the vinyl in his hands at Rocksteady Reunion. I think it was 99 or 2000. I don't even know if I ever got a copy, to be honest, but I just remember being like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen my name on Wax before. So I think that was the first time.
At what point did you decide to, like you say, pursue a solo career? Early 99, 2000s?
Yeah, probably around the turn of the century. That sounds funny. Around the turn of the century is when I was like, man, this whole crew thing is just, I was very motivated and very driven, and I don't have a lot of patience. So maybe that was a part of it. And maybe, I don't know. I don't know if it was intentional or it's just how the cookie crumbled. It's just how it happened.
Right. Do you remember shopping demos and labels looking at you? Was there any of that bidding war type stuff going on with you early on?
You know, that sounds to me, when you say that, more like major label stuff. And I was always, to this day, still very much an independent artist. So no, I don't remember bidding wars. I do remember a lot of buzz and a lot of interest for sure, and a lot of doors opening for me. So primarily in Canada first, when it came to my solo career. We receive in Canada, even if you're huge, even if you're Cardi or Drake huge, we receive a lot of funding through arts programs. So I was getting upwards of over like $100,000, which is a lot at that time in Canada, to put together my own project. So that would be in lieu of a label paying that to you. It's like in Canada, there just is no infrastructure, or at the time, it's different now. But at the time, there was no infrastructure. So I was applying to like Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, Canada Arts Council, Factor Canada, much fact, like people know about these if they're from Canada, and they were giving me a lot of money that doesn't go in my pocket. It went towards projects and paying people to complete videos or albums, or even the promotional and marketing rollout campaign. We had commercials on television, like, but all that was funded by the grants. So that all happened probably between, I'd say, 2000 to 2005. 2005 is when I released my first full length, although interestingly enough, the mixtape that I dropped before the full length, which I tend to do, I tend to always drop mixtapes before full length, including today. That mixtape, the cover picture is me surrounded by a ton of cassettes and vinyl and CDs, a variety of them, and they're all albums that I was featured on. So nobody really knew that I hadn't dropped a project, because I've been featuring on people's stuff for a strong almost decade before I dropped in 2005. So people were like, that's your first album? That don't make no sense, because they have been hearing about me for a long time. Right. In Canada, that is. States is a different story. Yeah.
So that project was Where I've Been, the collection?
Well, yes, that's the first mixtape. Yeah.
Okay. What kind of buzz did that give you? And what was your train of thought going into your first full-length project?
Whew. When I think back, it's like discipline begets discipline. So that was the craziest time of my life in terms of all the different things I was juggling. I was in school full time and doing well in school. I was working more than one job, and I was working on these all these projects, I basically, any other moment I had was doing something related to recording and performing in hip hop. I was hosting an open mic night once a month in Toronto. So yeah, I mean, I think that time everything fed everything else. And it just happened in a very, I'm not saying it fell in my lap. There was a lot of hard work, but it was just like, you didn't think about it. It was just like, it was almost like moving through the matrix, you know, you were just like, boom, 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 and things just happened. And a lot of stuff fell into place then that now that I took for granted then, that now when I look back, I'm like, shit, you had like a lot of people just like, yo, let me help you. You know, you had a lot of people, whether it be photographers or producers or mix engineers or anybody, like they were just all like, yo, like, let me support you. And that's something that when you get older and you're in a different place in the business, you're like, wow, that was really just a really enchanted time. That's what it felt like.
Right.